So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Greg. I work at the Center for Global Education at Komaba campus. Uh, and today I want to talk, the title of my talk is Collaboration, Reflection, and Growth, Takeaways from the PanSIG 2024 Conference. I'll talk briefly about the PanSIG conference, but I want to spend um, the majority of my time talking a little bit about the research that myself and my uh, uh, collaborators, my research partners have been working on. And then I'd like to, maybe hear from the people here who are attending today and get your sort of ideas and feedback and just have a conversation with you about this idea of sort of research collaboration. So just in case people are, attending aren't aware of what PanSIG is. PanSIG is a conference that's held by the JALT, the Japan Association for Language Teaching. And this is a quite a large academic organization for language teachers in Japan. Mostly people teaching English in some capacity, but also includes people who teach other languages as well. It's a pretty interesting association in that it's not simply people teaching in the university level, but also includes high school teachers, people teaching at, like eikaiwas, like part-time teaching, as well as people who teach young children. And it's it's very focused on teaching as a practice and education. And so I think it's really interesting and stimulating. And then the association itself has special interest groups. So on the right here, you can see there's like a few examples of that. They're just sort of smaller little organizations or communities within the broader one. So there's ones for university educators, there's ones for people interested in the issues of, like, say, gender diversity in language teaching, people interested in cognitive sciences. So it's kind of an interesting group. And then they have this annual conference is like a sort of an annual meeting for all these little special interest groups, and people present at this conference. If you haven't been to any of these JALT conferences, then I recommend it. They're pretty chilled out and relaxed and kind of very supportive. Um, this one was in Fukui, which I'd never been to before, and so it was kind of fun to go to as well. The next one is in Chiba. ありがとうございました。So the title of the talk that I gave with my colleagues was laying the foundation for meaningful research collaboration, and that was presented with Alexandra Terashima, who's a professor in the same department as myself at University of Tokyo, as well as Anna Bordilovskaya, who was previously teaching with us at Todai and is now at Tokyo City University. And the presentation, we were discussing our sort of the growth of our research collaboration. So the three of us had originally come together in 2022, not with any sort of strong research questions or goals. We had a sort of shared interest in text analysis or corpus linguistics. And we were interested in using this data collection that we have essentially. So we all teach, I think I have a few colleagues here, but maybe some people who aren't aware of what we do. So we all teach compulsory classes for first-year students, either for students in the sciences or for students in the humanities and social sciences. And they are required to teach, write a term paper, essentially roughly 1,500 words. And then that's all submitted, through a central database that we run. And so we've got this collection of student papers dating back to, I think, 2008, I think. And it's really, except for one time a couple years ago, nobody's ever really used it as a as a source for learning about our students or learning about how our students write, really. And so we kind of wanted to make use of it. Um, and we were going to originally focus just on the science writing side, because as Alexandra and Anna were both, that was their main focus of teaching, was teaching for the science writing side. It's a very busy day today at my house. So, but as we got together, hey, じゃあね、大丈夫だ。ゆっくり。so we got together. We didn't have a really strong research question or focus, and so we spent quite a long time sort of meeting on a regular basis, reading papers. Yeah, じゃあまたね。Reading papers, discussing various approaches. We went back and forth on a lot of ideas, and nothing really kind of it clicked essentially. And so we spent some time, I don't know, wandering might be one way to think about it. But eventually we sort of found a really interesting focus for us, uh, using the data set to develop teaching materials we could use in our class. And making use of a sort of genre approach to analyzing student text, to looking at skillful and less skillful ways of communicating their science results and their research, using some established frameworks, but that haven't been applied very much on first year second language writers, especially in the science context. But the main goal was to develop classroom materials using this research, and I think that really helped us a lot as well, in terms of you know one of the things we wanted to talk about in this particular talk was the sort of the pressures that people in our position tend to face, in the sense that we're all in teaching focused positions, and with quite heavy teaching loads, with no publication requirements, which is quite nice for the most part. But at the same time, in the long term, and we're also in relatively unstable jobs to a certain degree. And so in the long term, to develop or to increase the chances of job security, we're for better or worse evaluated on publications and publications through research that you're doing. So finding time for this is really challenging. So we developed our project. We developed a pilot version of it, and we tested it out in a classroom as well. And we presented those initial results at the JALT annual conference last year. And we noticed it was I think even though conference presentations themselves are not necessarily a sort of high value currency in terms of sort of how we're evaluated externally. It was still, I think, a meaningful for us kind of benchmark or checkpoint in terms of our research collaboration. We'd gone from, having a relatively unfounded or unfocused research approach to something that was quite, focused, well-defined, had some initial outputs, and had presented it to people. And so in addition to this sort of sense of accomplishments and this benchmark and this recognition that we had, moved forward, we had attended a few talks at the JALT conference we attended a few talks as well at the JALT conference on these concepts of critical friends, as well as communities of inquiry and collaborative autoethnography, which were all different approaches for looking at group dynamics and supportive groups, and how you can also support these groups through processes of reflection. And so we sort of made a little sideline into deciding to engage in a period of sort of sustained reflection on our accomplishments and on our dynamics as a group to kind of see why our group had been, relatively successful. It had been sustainable, and we all felt a certain sense of personal and professional growth within the group and a sense of meaningful accomplishment. And during our process, we kept coming back to this Russian folk tale. Both Anna and Alexandra are from Russia, and they'd grown up with this folk tale where a swan and a pike and a crawfish they're all yoked, they're all attached to this heavy cart, and they have to take it to market. I don't know why. I read the story a while ago. I'm not exactly sure why they're all doing this, but in any case, they're all attached to this cart and they have to take it to market. But they all have their own sort of tendencies, right? So the swan wants to fly off, the pike wants to kind of dive back into the water, and then the crayfish wants to sort of scuttle sideways. And so because they sort of revert back to their sort of tendencies or habits, they don't go anywhere, right? And we kept coming back to this because we all felt, at a certain level, we all have these kinds of carts that we're trying to move forward. Whether the cart is our career in some sense or a project, and we want to make some sort of progress on it. And working together, working alone, the cart might be too big to pull, right? And that's something that for ourselves and our group, we had all recognized that we had, had real difficulties and challenges in trying to, make time in our personal, professional lives to move our research forward, and we both were quite frustrated by this sort of being able to get out of that kind of rut, essentially, right? And we would think, well, working together, obviously, two heads are better than one and three heads are better than one. And there's certainly that is very true, but it's not necessarily the case that just because you're all together that your group's going to move your cart forward. And so it took, and we certainly recognize some aspects of our own personalities in these three animals. Anna and Alexandra both labeled me as the swan. I personally interpret that as that it's just because I'm an extremely, elegant person like swans are, but I think they interpreted it slightly differently. Anyways, it was quite a useful framework for us to see. And so for us, what we had seen was that we all, as individuals have our own sort of tendencies and habits, but that we had been able to move our cart forward. And how have we done that? And so we engaged in this process of collaborative reflective inquiry. So reflection is kind of a tool that's often used in teacher training in various aspects of professional development, usually by yourself in many ways. There's a lot of kind of established techniques for that, but also I think in groups. And that was something that we found useful based on literature we'd examined from things like Critical Friends and communities of inquiry, things like that. So we developed a series of prompts that were designed to push us towards thinking about various aspects of our group dynamics and our projects, as well as to prompt stories and narratives. And then we wrote those in Google Docs and then shared them with each other. And then as we were reading them, we could comment on them. And then through that, we sort of developed a process of writing more sort of what they call like memos based on what are reflections of those reflections, and then it had a series of meetings, which we were sort of recording and transcribing and using that as data and sort of starting to develop taking a more kind of essentially like ethnographic approach to our research group. And then after that, we went through all the sort of materials we had sort of collected, the sort of data, the written reflections, the comments, the memos, the transcribed meetings. We went back and looked through old notes of ours as well as old emails to kind of reconstruct some of these stories. It was quite interesting because we realized that the three of us had our own individual story of how the group had come together in the first place, and it was kind of an interesting experience of putting that together collectively. And we found a few themes just through going through a sort of normal sort of qualitative thematic analysis of this, and just in terms of three things, what we found and what we found was interesting, especially when we're doing this in advance of the presentation in Fukui, is that we got some feedback on our initial abstract to the PanSIG conference. And our initial title was, you can see I've crossed out here, our initial title was Laying the Foundation for Successful Research Collaboration. And we got this, one of the feedback that we got from somebody on this committee was, could you talk about, there's two things. One was, could you talk about like what kind of success your group has had, whether in terms of grants like Kakenhees or publications you've gotten out of that. And then also they wanted to talk about what were the sort of times of conflict we had had. And we found that was quite interesting and really useful kind of feedback for us, both in terms of, the assumption that group dynamics are inherently conflict ridden in terms of interpersonal conflict, which we had not experienced, which we found kind of interesting. But the other aspect was this sense of evaluating your research in terms of lines on a CV, right? In terms of converting your labor into academic capital through grant awards or publications. And our group had initially, I think, started off like this in terms of focusing on, we're going to do this research, we're going to get a project, we're going to publish something, and had that kind of very goal-focused orientation, which is very useful to a certain level. But what we recognize is that, over time, as your group evolves and learns and develops, that maybe your interests might shift slightly, or things might happen where your research might go in a direction you didn't really expect. And that's, maybe kind of common, but it's kind of useful to think about in terms of the adaptability. And we certainly found it was much easier for us to conduct research when it was aligned very closely with our teaching practice. I think what we learned through our reflections is that many of us in the group had, research was always like an extra thing on top of the teaching that we were trying to fit in and make time either in, our non-teaching days or in our vacation time or weekends or night times. It was always something extra. And that was certainly the case too when we were trying to do some more text analysis focused research on this corpus. But once we found a way to link it to our actual, job that we spent 95% of our time on, it really clicked for us. And so finding ways to, closely integrate research into the things that you're already doing was something that we found was really beneficial for us, as well as being open to this sort of change and collaboration. We also found it was really useful for us. We noticed that what helped us was recognizing the limits of our time in a very kind of a realistic way that might be frustrating at points, but it's useful to be in a group where you can kind of continually make progress, because if you're having a bad week, somebody else can pick up the slack. And so your project is always can move forward inch by inch. Your proverbial cart can keep moving forward, working group, setting realistic goals, and being adaptable to the sort of rhythms of teaching life, And then the other thing we found too is we noticed that, when you're by yourself, we tended to have kind of internalized, attitudes towards and expectations, and maybe overly ambitious expectations about, what we wanted to achieve, and that didn't probably match the amount of time and energy we had. And then you'll also feel this kind of sometimes shame or embarrassment of working with other people and feeling like you're going to let them down. But being, finding a way in your group to keep it low key, low stress, no shame, and developing that kind of mutual trust support was what we found really, really, really vital for us. Um, and I think, this is something that was useful doing the reflection process, was to recognize um, amongst all of us, like the things that we found really positive and beneficial to us. Um, so it was really useful for recognizing kind of repetitive patterns of behavior that or thinking that we had. Um, and we definitely felt a sense of personal and professional growth in terms of after we'd done this sort of process of looking at our strengths as a group, as a team. And it made us, I think we doing this process of reflection as well helped us in other areas of our professional life we had talked about, like when we're having working in other teams in different capacities in professional life, where the teams might have different dynamics, and being more um, kind of adaptable and flexible in different areas, because we had a sort of a sense of um, things can change over time, right? And this helped us really, I think, as well, focus on finding work that was meaningful for us, rather than focusing purely on, you know, uh, the pressure to convert our time and labor into some sort of like academic capital. But the other thing we did find that was kind of interesting, which some of the literature talks about and some of it doesn't, or shows the opposite, is we felt a real strong emotional component. And like there's this feeling of kind of fear, in sharing a part of yourself with other people, as well as reading what other people might write about you. You're kind of worried about. We all kind of felt this strong sense of emotion. Like it took me a few days to kind of build up the power, the energy to read my colleagues' reflections and think about it. Then once you did it, there was a real uh, cathartic kind of feeling. So it was really interesting to see that. And so I think, one of the things we're discovering in terms of how can other teams integrate reflective inquiry into their processes as a way to sustain build sustainable groups, is that the certain amount of trust that is necessary to be built up in the first place in order to conduct these kind of collaborative reflections. And so that might be the next step for us in terms of this sort of like sideline of research for us is how much trust is necessary to enable these kinds of reflective inquiries to be a sort of positive thing. So I think the main thing we're sort of trying to push forward in this side of our part of our group's work, and in terms of this ongoing aspect of it, is trying to push uh, especially people that are in teaching focused positions to try to find community and partnership and collaboration. Um, because I think it's really helpful not only in developing sort of sustainable habits uh, of work, but also finding those sort of groups that allow for mutual support. I think really helps us feel a sense of not only professional development, but also I think personal satisfaction and increasing the sort of meaningfulness that you find in your work. And so through doing this, and I wish I had my picture back here, but I'm going to go back here. We all have our tendencies. I apparently am a swan that likes to fly off. But through sort of reflection, we were realizing what were our sort of tendencies, how could we work together, and how could we use them as a strength to sort of move our cart forward. All right. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking to you.